What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to be talking about the danger of reductionism in fitness and why most of us should probably just stay bro lifters. And when I say reductionism, I'm talking about trying to really understand what's going on inside your body under the skin at a mechanistic level. Things like muscles, leverages, like insertions, hormones, biological processes like that, leaning heavily on scientific studies for our understanding. And to talk about that, I'm going to be sharing some things that happened in the debate between myself and Cassim Hansen of N1 and also my coach Lucas from Range of Strength. Before we get into it, I want to really quickly just plug the shirt. This is the One Lift to Rule Them All shirt from Rascal. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, so I really like this one. Just use the link in the description to get one. Use discount code Atlas. But let's get into it. I'm going to try to make this a one take video because whenever the toddlers wake up, my time's up. So hopefully I can get through this all. Okay, so recently I participated in a debate with Coach Cassim and Lucas. Cassim solicited debate participants to debate the prompt that pullovers are a great lat exercise, or I think he said pullovers are the best lat exercise. Now, I never intended to defend that particular premise. There's only one person that I know who's ever actually made that claim that pullovers are actually the best lat exercise. Strangely, he didn't show up for the debate. In fact, the only people that did have the spinal fortitude to show up for the debate were myself and Lucas, and both of us are ardent practitioners of the Jefferson curl. So, as I said in the debate, I think maybe some of these other guys need to practice the Jefferson curl so they have the spinal fortitude to actually show up for debates and back up what they say. But anyway, I did show up absolutely on the side that pullovers are a good lat exercise. So I recommend you guys all go look at the debate. It's really interesting. Cassim shared a lot of really good stuff. Lucas had a lot of very cool perspective on it, and I hope that I contributed in some way myself. But spoiler, it didn't really end up being that much of a debate at the end of it. I don't think we had that much disagreement because what ended up happening was this. So, for those of you who don't know, there's a large faction, especially on Instagram, of people that have been claiming that pullovers are not a lat exercise. They are purely a pec and tricep exercise. And the reason they're claiming that the pullover is a pec and tricep exercise is because of an EMG study that showed that they put electrodes on the lats, the pecs, and the triceps, conducted a pullover of a particular type. I've already put up a video dissecting it. Uh, kind of critiquing the form that they used in their study. But anyway, they wired up, I think it was like 8 or 9 folks with electrodes and had them do pullovers of a certain type and just measured the results. And they got more pec and tricep activation than they did lats. Hence, there's been a very loud faction of people on Instagram, chief among them obviously being Paul Carter, just arrogantly proclaiming that the pullover is a pec and tricep exercise. Absolutely not broking any debate. Just case closed. Why are we still talking about this? It's all pecs and triceps. I mean, so what pretty much ended that is that Casson pointed out that, well, if you actually understand biomechanics, which I think a lot of these people are getting in over their head when it comes to biomechanics. They're reading the studies, but they don't have a thorough knowledge that you need to actually do it well. We'll get into that later. Anyway, what he pointed out, because he actually understands the stuff, is that you know the what we would expect and what he's found, and he's done some EMG tests in his own lab, and what we would expect and what he's confirmed is that the teres major is actually the primary mover in that type of pullover, right? And for those of you who don't know, the teres major is, a little muscle. I'm not even pointing to it, right above the lats. That in many cases does help with, it works in conjunction with the lats in a lot of exercises. So a lot of bro lifters like myself tend to roll the teres major in with the lats. So from the bro perspective, a lot of times we don't even differentiate. I will point out that my teres majors are very differentiated when you actually look at my back. Like if you look at the last video where I'm doing a bunch of back flexing, they're very pronounced. But anyway, um, so what it ended up being is the teres major was not even addressed. There were no electrodes in the teres major in this study. So the muscle that we would expect to be the prime mover is simply not being tested. So what we have is a situation like the drunk, the joke about the drunk looking for his keys under a streetlight. You know, a police officer comes upon a drunk man who's looking for something under a streetlight, and the drunk guy says, "I lost my keys, and can you help me look?" And the police officer says, "Oh, okay, so you lost your keys here?" "Well, no, I lost them over there, but I can't look over there because it's dark. The light's here, so this is where I'm looking, right?" So that's kind of what we end up, that's the situation that we end up being in this whole controversy. You have people like Paul just saying that that the pecs and triceps are the only muscles worked because those were the only muscles tested. And in this particular version, I think, from the variation they used, I do think it biases more towards pecs than lats. So if we have a version of pullover that is biasing towards the pecs and triceps and is not measuring at all the teres majors, well, then of course we're going to see that it's pecs and triceps. But it's, in reality, none of those are the prime mover. The prime mover is the teres majors. um, Now, one little point of disagreement that I did have, a minor disagreement, I do think that it's possible to bias even more standard variations of pullovers towards the lats more. I won't get into that now. That could be a topic for another video. And there are certainly, Cassim would agree with me, I think, on this, that there are absolutely variations you can do that are going to be more lower lats, right? But anyway, point being, this whole controversy was caused by a bunch of people just going off one study that they did not have the sufficient understanding of biomechanics, the sufficient understanding of how science works to actually understand the limitations of that study. And even me, I looked at that study and I, I didn't think about that. Oh, they didn't look at the Terry's Majors. You know, because we bros tend to put Terry's majors in with lats so often, I kind of didn't differentiate either. I was just like, oh, sure, I'm sure they put, electrodes on there. But looking back, okay, obviously that's a stupid assumption. But anyway, for the bros who were saying that pullovers are a lat exercise, we're just going off of our feel. We're going off of our experience and our feel. You know, it's a little bit difficult to just feel the difference between your upper lats and your teres majors. Like they're like, they're wrapped into each other. They're right there. I mean, how do you feel that difference? Like, we know something back there is working, something that in fact makes us wider and more, V-shaped, and we can feel it working. So, oh no, it turns out that we were actually growing our teres majors, and like mine are freaking huge. Lucas's, by the way, are huge as well. Um, so like we are growing our V taper on our back. Just oops, we were growing the teres majors rather than the upper lats. Whereas the people that tried to get reductionistic end up looking like goofballs, right? So that shows us kind of the danger of reductionism. We're we're looking at things through a really fine level of resolution. Like, imagine binoculars. Or here's a better analogy: if you know anything about snipers, they usually work in pairs. Why is this? Well, because they'll be using extremely high magnification scopes where they can see, at extremely long ranges. But the problem with that is that really narrows your field of view. So there's a lot of stuff that you're going to be missing if you're looking at things through that high a degree of magnification. So they're typically going to want to have a spotter who's looking probably still through some binoculars or something, but at a lower level of magnification so that they can see more of the big picture to make sure they're not missing something. Otherwise, it'd be very dangerous to just have one guy looking through an extremely high magnification scope, not to mention just less effective. You need someone who's looking at the big picture to avoid missing something. And that is what happens when you get into reductionism, when you get into trying to look at things through too high a degree of magnification without seeing the big picture. You can miss stuff, and that's exactly what happened here. We focused in on the muscles that are apparently working in this EMG study without realizing that, oh, there are actually other muscles that are not even being looked at here. And that's kind of a common thread of what happens when we get into reductionism. Another really great classic example of reductionism in fitness is the egg. So it's been known for a long time, just from an experiential perspective, that eggs are a great bodybuilding food, right? Bodybuilders have always loved eggs. It's been tradition, and there's got to be a reason for it, right? So when we start to get into more of an understanding of actual nutrients in food, what immediately stood out was protein. Protein is good for bodybuilders. Bodybuilders love eggs. Therefore, protein must be what the bodybuilders are getting for eggs. Well, can we improve on that? I bet we could improve on that by just taking the protein component of it and getting rid of unwanted calories and fat. So let's just eat the egg whites and throw out the yolks, right? Now we're optimizing. We're getting more optimal and we're actually improving eggs as a bodybuilding food, right? Wrong, because it turns out that there are a ton of extremely valuable micronutrients in the egg yolk. So, bodybuilders were throwing out a lot of the actual valuable nutrition in the egg that is actually supporting testosterone and all these other wonderful things that bodybuilders need by trying to optimize, by trying to get reductionist and say, oh, it's about protein, right? Now, I'm not saying egg whites never have a place, but you see what I'm getting at, right? By trying to rush into reductionism and look at things at too fine a level of detail, if we don't have our ducks in a row, we can easily miss something and end up metaphorically throwing out the egg yolk of good nutrition when we get to that level. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, of course it's not. I'm talking about Coach Cassim here, like giving us all, valuable education on what the pullover actually does, and in fact, ending a controversial debate in fitness. So, actually understanding biomechanics, actually being prepared to get down to that level of detail and doing it right, that can have massive benefits. And I think that's why we have such a drive to get to that reductionist mode of thinking, because when it's done well, it offers incredible benefits. Like, I mean, most of the scientific advances that we now enjoy do come from breaking things down to their smaller component parts, looking at it at a finer resolution, actually not just seeing what works, but understanding why it works. I mean, that offers incredibly valuable insight, and that is what worked for the vast majority of the advancements that we know today. But we're looking at this from kind of a survivorship bias. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen the meme of the airplane that's got a bunch of bullet holes in it, just kind of to show that it will work for me. We're seeing a lot of survivorship bias with those advancements. These are the cases where that worked, but there are a ton of cases where people tried to rush into um, an overly fine level of resolution without being fully prepared for the complexity that they might be ignoring, and ended up actually making things worse. And that's the issue with reductionism. Whereas if you look at things without magnification, you're just looking at the big picture, you're looking at things at the level that you can directly perceive them. You're not getting all the detail. You're not seeing the fine detail, but you're seeing the big picture, you're seeing what works. Sometimes all you need to know is what works. If you just know from an experiential perspective, hey, this exercise, let's use pullovers as an example. This exercise tends to make bodybuilders wide. Hmm, must be something there. Maybe it probably trains those things along the side of the back that makes bodybuilders look wide. I bet that's what's going on. Let me just go ahead and do pullovers, right? Okay, we screwed up a little bit. We weren't exactly. Although again, I would maintain you can train the rest of the lat as well with pullovers, but you do need to have fairly specific technique considerations there. But if we screwed up between differentiating between the teres majors and the upper lats, okay, it's not precise. We are more or less in the right direction, but not precise. That still works versus the reductionistic or the unprepared reductionistic folks who just completely threw out the egg yolk of pullovers entirely because their methods weren't picking up the teres major. So we the bro lifters who didn't try to get in over our heads and just try to you know interact with bodybuilding at the level that we can perceive it. We ended up being slightly off, but good enough. You know what I mean? We're still getting our backs wider, and they're just completely dead wrong, right? So that's where that's the danger when we try to rush into that level of analysis, right? Um, the experiential fitness is kind of heuristic. Well, it's monkey see, monkey do. It's if it worked for him, it'll probably work for me. That sort of thing. That's not precise, but it usually steers you in the right direction, right? Whereas trying to get into mechanisms, it can give you a really good insight, but it can also just have you completely off base, just completely not even on the target if you get something wrong, right? It's heuristics versus algorithms. The heuristic lets you make generally good decisions, not always precise, but generally good decisions when you don't have complete information. You're going to be more or less right. Algorithms can give you the exact right answer, but if any single figure in there is wrong, you're going to get a completely wrong answer that has nothing to do with the correct answer, right? And that I think that's what we see time and time again with people who rush into the more complex type of analysis, right? So I think the vast majority of lifters would probably be better served, like me, being a bro lifter, right? That's one of the dangers that I see with one of the dangers that I see with biomechanics and the rush to find the most optimal exercise for everything. Not that it can't be done well. I mean, Coach Casson does biomechanics, and he does it well. And I think the information that he's providing is valuable. But with bringing that out and making that a kind of a trend in the wider fitness community, I really worry that we're going to have a tendency to get into maybe some precise ways of targeting certain muscles. But in doing so, we're going to throw out, valuable exercises that, like the egg yolk I talked about, had benefits we weren't necessarily thinking about that were also a part of it that we unknowingly were relying on for other things. Like, just as an example, I'm not gonna I'm spitballing here, but let's say somebody's relying on, for example, really wide grip pull-ups, right? Okay, well, we found a better, more biomechanically optimal way to target the lats. Let's stop doing those. Well, oops. I guess, the what we didn't realize was that the rear delts were actually getting a lot of work from that, and we forgot to include rear delts. Now, you can optimize for rear delts too. But what I'm saying is, like, if you forget, like, if you try to get down to that finer level of detail, get the more optimal exercise for each individual part, you got to make sure that you're not missing anything, right? And it'd be easy to let rear delts slip. Now, you can do it well too, and also get something great for the rear delts, right? Or to get to an even more forgotten thing, like what about the rotator cuff? The smaller muscles of the rotator cuff. Maybe something that you were doing was actually working those. Okay, now we try to refine it. We try to get a little more optimized for another more showy muscle that we want to develop. Oops, we forgot that. I mean, the pullover is actually a perfect example of that as well. It's something that if we want to optimize for a particular area of the upper back, we might go to some other movement, but then we're missing out on a lot of the shoulder mobility benefits that were packaged into pullovers back in the day that were, in all likelihood, in my opinion, and I think it's hard to I think there's a really strong case for this. Like, a big part of the reason why lifters of yesteryear don't seem to have had nearly as many shoulder issues as we do now. I mean, yes, it probably has to do with more balance between overhead pressing and bench press, but I think a big part of it was everybody was doing pullovers back in the day, so everybody was just from day one building and maintaining good shoulder mobility. And now we have a lot of people that just are not doing anything that does that. So, well, I'm not saying the pullover isn't an optimal exercise for back development. I think it's actually, depending on what variation you're doing, it's fantastic for teres majors, for example. And I think you can, again, I do think, depending on your variation, your execution, you can also make it a good lat exercise. And but it's undoubtedly a great teres major exercise, and mine prove that, I think. Um, but in addition to that, we have the added benefit of good overhead mobility, which in turn allows us to press well and develop massive shoulders. A lot of people these days have shoulder problems, and a lot of people these days have difficulty developing their shoulders. So when we get into too much reductionism, when we're trying to focus in too much on optimizing, for one particular muscle, we got to be really careful just before we tear down Chesterton's fence. Am I even saying the right name? Chesterton's fence. Yeah. The idea of Chesterton's fence is, if you're walking along in the middle of the woods and you see a fence, before you tear that fence down, you ought to make sure you know why somebody put that fence up in the first place, because there could be something you don't want to see behind that, right? So when we get into trying to optimize a particular exercise, I think we have to be really careful to make sure that we know everything that exercise was doing for us. That may not be, the surface level, like a number one thing we were doing it for, but may have been an ancillary benefit that we may not be thinking of. So we need to make really sure that we understand everything it's doing for us before we try to replace it with something that's more optimized, right? And we that is absolutely possible. You can do that, but boy, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of I mean, you really have to be on your A game for that to work. I personally don't think that I'm at that level of sophistication where I could get away with that. I'm sure I'd miss stuff. And, I'm probably more qualified than most people to actually try to do that, but I'm not going to try to get to that level. So, I think most of us should be a little bit more cautious with that sort of thing. Try not to get the magnification on our scopes too high unless we have a spotter behind us to watch our back, and stick to a little bit more surface level. Make sure we're, looking at that level of analysis that we can easily perceive and understand. And if we miss a little bit of precision, that's fine. It's better than completely missing something and being dead wrong, right? I hope that makes some degree of sense to you. I think the toddlers are waking up, so I'm going to sign off. But I think I made my point. It's not to say that it's bad to look at biomechanics. It's not to say it's necessarily bad to look at science. But we have to be really careful not to get in over our heads and in over the level of complexity. Sorry, the kid's waking up, that we can understand. All right, thank you. And if you enjoyed this, do all the algorithm stuff for me. Appreciate it.